Today is a part one with my guest Colin Davis. Colin is an artist and an author dedicated to understanding and demystifying the dark side of human consciousness. Part two is going to really go deep into the how when it comes to shadow work. First, we needed to set the stage. Colin, so deeply and thoroughly yet accessibly today in our interview, goes into terminology such as what is the shadow? What is the golden shadow? What is the difference between individuation and integration? And what is the matrix and what does it actually mean to get out of it? I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did and hope to see you for
So,
part two.
Colin, I want to talk to you today about your work. I've been participating in some groups with you that you're holding over the last several weeks, maybe even a couple of months, and I find them fascinating. And I'm really excited to talk to you today about probably one of your specialties, the shadow. If you could just, my first question to you is, what is the shadow and why can't we see it?
Okay, so when we're so the shadow. Okay, first of all, when we use the word shadow, or when I use the word shadow, I'm referring in the most basic way to Carl Jung's definition of the shadow. And this originally started with Freud's understanding of the shadow, but then Carl Jung definitely changed his understanding, but kept using the same word. I think in the Freudian sense, I think the shadow was basically the entire unconscious. But what Jung pointed out was that the shadow is not the entire unconscious at all. The shadow is the parts of the unconscious, unconscious thoughts, feelings, images, impulses, drives, different kinds of psychic material that should become conscious. Those drives, that energy really should make its way into your consciousness, into your conscious ego, so to speak. And and you should develop a relationship with that part of yourself. And I mean, in the Jungian sense, you should put it into your persona. In other words, allow your whole character to include that aspect of yourself. And when you reject or repress parts of yourself because they are antithetical to the way you see yourself, they are oppositional to the way your family thinks that you ought to be, or your culture thinks that you ought to be. I mean, you could just basic stuff like sexual stuff, sexual impulses, homosexuality, that kind of stuff, or aggression and um, and, um, and aggressive tendencies and aggressiveness in your personality, or um, or or aspects of you that people would think are weak, compassion and empathy and these kind of things, or leftover stuff from trauma. So you have old repressed guilt and grief or shame or rage, and you haven't been able to accept these feelings because to do so would hurt. You'd have to go back and relive old memories. To bring this material up to your family would make your family perhaps push away from you, and so you would naturally kind of repress those things, and you would go about life in a state of in a what Jung would say in a divided state. And so then Jung would say that because we're dividing off portions of ourselves that we can't accept and pushing them down into the unconscious, into the shadows, so to speak, then that is the sort of the core source of neurosis or of mental illness. And shadow work is basically the process of uncovering the unconscious material that's being repressed, that you don't even at first know you're repressing, and start doing its archaeological work. It's digging down into your own unconscious and starting to pull up all the stuff, the ugly stuff, the dark stuff, and and then and by doing this, then you end up because we don't know until we start investigating this. We don't know that we're actually projecting our shadow material into the world as sort of a protection circuit. So we have all this dark stuff, all this primal rage and sexuality and old wounded symptoms of trauma and all this. We have all this down there, and because we can't accept it, the psyche basically has kind of like a circuit breaker mechanism. And so what we do is, if we the sort of the default thing to do is just repress it and not know that it's there. But then the next thing to do is, when it does get triggered, when it gets pointed out, then what we do is we project it onto somebody else, and we say, no, you're the one who's greedy. You're the one who's aggressive. You're the murderer. You're the bad one. And it can look very cartoonish, really. It's such a simple and archaic method of protecting the ego from this caustic shadow material, that we just throw it out onto other people. And then it causes all kinds of conflict in the world. And this is also related to the concept called scapegoating, where you can have an entire society will have all this shared repressed shadow material, and they can't deal with it, and so they'll scapegoat it onto another group, onto the Jews, or onto blacks, or onto whoever it is. They'll scapegoat their own shadow stuff onto another group, and then all kinds of horrific stuff will happen. And it's sort of again, a very primitive offloading mechanism for trying to deal with something that's very caustic, that people up till now do not really have, in general, in the public. We do not really have the maturity or the tool set to individually metabolize our own shadow material. And so shadow work it's a very advanced in the way that what you're going to be doing when you're doing this work is quite cutting edge, and it's quite evolutionary.
Thank you. That's a wonderful, wonderful definition and understanding. Is it safe to say that most likely every human living today needs shadow work?
I would say that if you know what to look for, the psyche will show you you will always have opportunities to do the work. And basically, the most kind of archetypal opportunity to do shadow work is after you've had some kind of a cycle in life where I point back to Edinger's psychic life cycle, and this is described in the book Ego and Archetype. But the psychic life cycle is sort of the continual process that we're all going through in life, and where we just go through life, and we naturally project all kinds of things into the world, not just our shadow, but we project our highest self too, the higher self, the capital S self in the Jungian sense. And we have opportunities to get in touch with our genius, to get in touch with our highest purpose. And maybe we get out of college and we feel like we're on the right career path and all of this, or we whatever is going on in life, or we start a family and everything's going great, and we're really riding high, and things are going well for us. And then inevitably what happens is we get ahead of ourselves, and we start to get too grandiose, as we say. And then when you're getting grandiose, you're doing all of this psychological projection onto the world, and it's not accurate. And so we end up making all kinds of mistakes, and then we end up slipping, and we end up crushing or destroying relationships, and we end up making bad mistakes, and then we get too full of ourselves, or too inflated, we could say. And then that starts to bring us down the other side of the cycle, and we start to kind of tumble and crash. And then we are in some kind of a state of depression, and we're in a bankruptcy, or we're in a foreclosure, we're in a divorce, or we're in a career change. And then we don't know what's going on with us, and who am I, and what do I want to do with myself. And that's the bottom of the psychic life cycle. And it can be very deep, to the point to where we would call it a dark night of the soul. Or it can just, it can just be, it doesn't have to be that deep. Depending on how high you were flying, kind of shows you how far down you're going to fall. The addict, it's called rock bottom. And so it is at the low point. That's the part where humility comes in. That's the part where self-reflection comes in. Because when you're flying high and everything's going great for you, you don't need to start looking at all your garbage, all your yucky stuff, all the ways that you were lying to yourself, all the things that you were denying, and all of your all of your weaknesses. You don't need to be looking at that when things are going well. And the ego, the conscious mind, wants to maintain its energy level, and it won't let you look at all this yucky stuff that would be deflationary. And so it's only after a crash where you get the chance to look at your mistakes and become humble about things and come down to earth, so to speak. And that's the place where the shadow material, the previously repressed stuff, really starts to come into consciousness. And you start to look back at your mistakes, and look back at all the ugly things that you were doing, and start to take an accounting of the dark side of yourself. Now, the person who is extremely narcissistic or psychopathic, they're going to fight this, and they're not going to take an accounting of this. But the average person will have an opportunity to take an accounting, and if they know that the bottom of the psychic life cycle is the place where you start to do this evolutionary work, and that you don't need to fear the bottom of the life cycle, that's the construction phase. That's the beginning. In alchemy, that's where you get the prima materia. That's where you get the basic original material that you're going to start purifying as you continue your self-development work. So that's the place where you most likely will get in touch with a good amount of shadow material and really have the opportunity to do this work. But there's also all kinds of little mini cycles that are going on, just mood swings that are happening from day to day. And anytime you are sort of at the bottom of one of these little mini cycles, this is the perfect opportunity. Or anytime that the psyche just presents this material to you, you just get an epiphany, you just get a sudden self-awareness, and you realize, you just become self-reflective, and you realize, oh, wow, oh, yuck, that's me. You look in the mirror, so to speak, or a dream shows up, and your shadow material is represented as a character in the dream, and then you have an opportunity to do this. So the time to do shadow work is the time when the psyche says this is the time to do shadow work. It presents itself to you.
Which I've experienced seems like the most inopportune time to actually try to do the work. And I find that in the traditional way that we handle these crisis type of events within our life, traditionally, we can do one of two things. We can isolate ourselves and use that as an opportunity to do some self-reflection, or sometimes we then progress into mirroring some of the wounds onto people or with other people that in essence are keeping us in a state of feeling stuck or in victim mentality. I even think about, when we go into deep states of depression or anxiety after a huge existential crisis or dark night of the soul, there's so many offerings that the world provides us to not just self-reflect. So my question to you is, this is somewhat new, I think, for Western culture,
Yes. Yes.
is to really take full responsibility of what you've been missing. And in that darkest deep state, to somehow within you say, this is the time for me to transform. This is the time for me to look at myself differently and actually do the work.
Yes.
A question I have for you is the way that we have orchestrated it up to this point collectively in the West. What is the detriment of doing it the way that we've always been doing it, which is to seek relief or to medicate or to continue to stay in a victim mindset? What is the repercussions of continuously not really going deep into your own shadow?
Well, it's the inability to actually transform or evolve. And so you just keep getting the same kind of repeating pattern. If we're talking at the collective level, at the societal level, you just kind of it's like the addict who has they have a crash and they have the opportunity, but they fail to take the opportunity, and then they have another crash, and then there's maybe an intervention, but the intervention doesn't work, and they just keep on going until they end up committing suicide or just in whatever, just completely destroying themselves. And so it takes so when the way we've been doing things is that actually nature has been working things out for us, and we have been evolving, and the societal or the alchemy that is going on in humanity is happening, and we are waking up, and we are becoming more self-reflective, and we are learning from our past and learning from our mistakes, but it's happening over a period of millennia.
Right.
Right, so it is happening. The collective psyche is evolving, and we are, it's sort of a spiraling, and we are evolving, but but at the individual level, and the collective will just continue to do it at that level, but at the individual level, this is basically another aspect of alchemy, and why alchemy is the perfect metaphor for doing shadow work and inner development work, is because alchemy is taking natural processes, processes that are going on in nature, and putting them together in a controlled, contained space in a laboratory and speeding up those processes. Nature might create some kind of a medicinal kind of product, naturally, or petroleum oil that you can use for energy or whatever. It might do this naturally, but you can also do it in the laboratory and create and make those processes happen much faster. So that's what we're doing when we're doing this kind of inner development work, is that it's inner alchemical work, and we can evolve or develop ourselves much faster than the group by taking responsibility for this work. And then I also wanted to say, just from something you were saying earlier, that if there were enough wisdom teachers, if there were enough people in our history that had been pointing out, hey, everybody, this is when you're in the dark night of the soul, this is the opportunity to do your evolution. And if this was part of our Judeo-Christian tradition, and if this was in there, then we would be in a different place than we are now. And that information was actually, it is in there, but it's in the esoteric tradition. It's in the underground hermetic tradition, or it's in the esoteric tradition. And because we use different understandings today than we did 300 years ago, and 1,000 years ago, and 2,000 years ago, when you go into the esoteric tradition and you start to look for this kind of information about psychospiritual or spiritual evolution and spiritual development, you find analogies and models and descriptions that are in words that don't fully translate for today. And if you go to another tradition, if you go to tantric yoga or something like that out of India, you're even further away from the way people think and understand today in the modern West. And there's another translation problem. So from what I've been able to figure out, the most helpful, most up to date, most evolutionary worldview that takes this truth into consideration and puts it in a full and proper context is the system that Carl Jung developed. And it is very much in the esoteric tradition of the West. And he kind of sort of updated that information and represented it in a way that is understandable to the 20th century and 21st century mind or Western mind. You do have to sort of, it is its own worldview, it is its own paradigm, and it is sort of an artistic spiritual science, and it is its own paradigm, and you have to sort of kind of go through some training to pick up the paradigm and understand what the modeling is, the Jungian system. But once you have that, then you have a whole perspective that supports the Westerner, the modern Westerner, doing this deep psycho-spiritual development and healing work.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
There's so much richness packed into all of this. I would like to believe that if someone has never heard of shadow work, that they often can resonate with looping patterns or feelings. I am looping patterns.
Looping patterns.
Why am I here
Cycles.
again? Why am I doing this again?
Yes.
I think that there's very tangible ways where people who've never heard of shadow work can identify with, I would like if my life did not include these sorts of repetitive cycles that seem to be harming my progression in life.
Yeah.
And for me, that's been one of the reasons why I've dedicated so much of myself to this sort of work, is because I notice when I'm unaware or I don't understand, it leads to more suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure, the conscious ego, doesn't want to have to go into the shadow stuff, and we could also just kind of simplify the to go into the stuff that you were denying before, that you didn't know was part of the equation, is a naturally deflating process.
Right.
And the conscious mind doesn't want to suffer. It doesn't want to feel bad. It doesn't want to suffer. It wants to keep feeling good and keep going forward. And it doesn't want to, it wishes that there was no cycling. It's kind of like thinking that I would like to have only the spring and the summertime, and can we just scratch off the fall and the winter, maybe, right? Can we just do that? Because I like the spring and summertime. It's very temperate and everything's great. I can go out and all of this, and there's more light and everything. That's the ego would like to do that, but the ego of the individual, or the mainstream understanding of a society, which is sort of the collective ego.
Can you explain that then as well, just for any people who maybe have there's a lot of
ego?
A lot of different theories sometimes that go around that, it's bad or it's not bad, and if you could just give us, your theory, that'd be great too.
Okay, yeah, sure, I'll do that. But just to finish on that one point is that we would like to cut off the dark parts of the changing of the climate, but we are way too small, and we have such a small sliver of an understanding of reality. Like, imagine, I'm like looking at the backyard here, and there's squirrels out there. I mean, how much about the universe does a squirrel know? Or how about the whole collective species of squirrels? I mean, we're kind of like that. We don't have the capacity to make decisions about how nature should work and what would be better if we could only not suffer, if we could only just, and this is the sort of Luciferian kind of impulse to want to control everything, and this Promethean impulse in mankind to order everything around us and to reform nature in such a way that benefits us, and where we don't have to deal with with the destruction side, with the entropy side, with the chaos side, with the shadow side. We want to kind of engineer that out of reality. But that is part of the entire transmutation of the universe. It's the downside of the whole duality paradigm that we are apparently in, and there's nothing that you're ever going to be able to figure out to be able to get rid of suffering, get rid of the bottom of the cycle, get rid of darkness. It ain't going to happen. And so what you need to do is you need to learn from those and use that as a swing to evolve yourself. But as far as the ego goes, yes, the understanding of the ego is you have different thinkers use the term in different ways. And in the Western psychological tradition, where you have, Freud and Jung and Western psychology, that's going to be one picture. And then you're going to have a slightly different picture coming from the East, and especially in the way in which Eastern spiritual gurus, so to speak, talked about the ego in, over the 20th century, when a lot of this Eastern mysticism made its way into the West. So in the East, the ego is kind of close to what the Jungians would call the persona. And it's sort of the outer shell, the sort of the vain part of you. It's the part of you that you show to others and that you sometimes confuse with your true self. And it contains in a lot of your cultural programming and familial programming that you need to kind of get through in order to find the higher self, the true self. And it's, in the Eastern sense, it's kind of something that is it's sort of a kind of a toxic brew that you want to kind of purify and get out of here. You want to get rid of the ego. Mm-hmm. In the Western psychological sense, the ego is a domain of the psyche. So the psyche, I mean, let's also say the psyche, the word psyche and the word mind are pretty much synonymous. Although some people would maybe say that the mind is kind of the higher heady functions of the psyche, where you're thinking and imagining and scheming, and that's the mind. But the mind is really it's the entire psyche, and so it's the thinking part, it's the prefrontal cortex stuff, but it's also the limbic system stuff. It's all the feeling states, all the emotional states. It's all of the lower impulsive drives, and so those are kind of like frequency bands, and you have higher frequencies and you have lower frequencies. But the whole spectrum of the inner world of the human being, the informational domain, you could sort of see it simply as with a computer, you have the hardware and the software, and the hardware is the actual physical parts, and the software is the energetic informational domain of information processing. Mm-hmm. And that's what the mind is in a simplistic metaphor or analogy. And the mind and the psyche in the Western psychological sense are pretty much the same thing. So when we say psyche, we mean mind. And the ego in this understanding is a portion of the psyche. It's the portion of the psyche that is, it's the conscious mind. It's the part of the mind that you're conscious of. It's the part of you that the ego is a continual state that every time you wake up in the morning, well, there I am again. When I'm asleep and I'm dreaming, the ego does not have that kind of sovereignty. And there's all kinds of unconscious complexes and processes that are going on in sleep and in dreaming. And then when you wake up, waking reality is the state of the ego. It's the desktop of the computer. It's the part that's in the light. In the metaphor of land, you could say that that everything that's above the water and on land and in the light is the conscious part, the ego, and then everything that's below the water, below the surface of the ocean, that's all the unconscious. So the ego is the conscious mind, and so it's not good or it's not bad. It's our consciousness, and so, but then in the Jungian framework, we also have sort of an outer layer of the ego, and it's sort of the kind of characteristic profile of an individual, and so it's all the persona is the way in which the ego is structured that other people can look at and go, oh, hey, here comes a policeman down the street because he has a police cap on and a badge and a uniform and a gun, and he has a police car. And then if you look a little bit more closely into his life, you'll find out that he did all the police training, and that he comes from a family of policing or military, and that he probably has more conservative political views and all of this. And there's attributes, some of which are come from his family, some of which are totally individualistic to him, some of which come from his tradition, his milieu, and he has a policeman persona, or she's a nurse, and it's the same kind of a deal, and she has a nurse persona, and she speaks with nursing language, and she's compassionate and wants to help, and her friends know her this way. The persona is sort of the outer layer of the ego that is there to interface with other people and the rest of the world. And so you have in this Jungian framework, you have the ego, the conscious mind, and then you have your outer persona, your more superficial trappings, kind of your superficial. You need a persona. It helps you identify yourself in the world and what your role is. It helps other people identify you. It's like your calling card, your business card. You need a persona. It's there, but it's not you. It's not the fullness of you. It's just a part of you. And then you have a lot of material that's going on in the unconscious.
Right.
You have what Jung called complexes, which are kind of like organs of the psyche. And then you have, behind complexes, you have these big flows of energy that he called archetypes. And then it mixed in there, you have all kinds of shadow material floating around in there, junk that's been repressed. It's trying to make its way up above water and into the light, but it's being repressed down. And then at the center of the whole thing is the DNA of the individual. The DNA is sort of the highest pattern in the individual, which is completely unique, and at the same time is completely connected to the rest of humanity, connected to the rest of nature, connected to the cosmos, connected to God, so to speak. It's what Jung called the imago Dei, the image of God. It's a little hologram, a little holographic slice, or in the Gnostic view, a spark of the divine that is at the center. It is sort of the organizing code of the individual, and Jung called this the self with a capital S. And the self is also the self is the organizing principle around the individual psyche, and it is also non-dual in a way. It doesn't have it has both light and dark in it. It's kind of like God and the devil together in one throne room. And but the self is the higher self in the Eastern understanding, and what the job of individuation is, what the Jungian alchemy is called, to become a true individual. The job is to be able to, for the ego, the conscious mind, the conscious self, to get in touch with the deeper purpose of one's individual being, to get in touch with the capital S self, and to be able to basically serve it like you serve God. And when you are not serving the ego, it's not the ego serving itself, like is a Luciferianism. It's not pure grandiosity of, how great I am. It's not that. It's much more humiliating than that, because what your ego might think is your role in life, and what your persona might be showing as what your role in life is. The capital S self will have some relation to that, but it'll have longer term plans for you, deeper plans for you, which may not resonate with the way you've been operating over the last 10 or 20 years. And it may be directing you to start shifting and to start turning the boat in another direction. And if the ego becomes so grand with itself and starts running things itself, then you get off track. And the further you get off track from the higher self or the deeper self's pattern or trajectory, then the more you find yourself being disconnected from yourself. You start losing meaning, losing purpose, losing that sense that you're in the right place, doing the right thing, losing your spiritual center. And so that is kind of the sort of basic, and we didn't go into all the complexes and archetypes and all that, but that's kind of a basic map of the mind, of the psyche, and how things are operating from a Jungian point of view.
Awesome. Wonderful. I heard a really great quote yesterday from, I think, Jonathan Pajot said that you can't choose identity. Identity is a gift from God. And I really resonated with that, is really getting addicted to this persona or this identity or career or what it is that we do within the world, is there becomes such an identification with that part of your ego. And when you really go through this process, for me, I was really shocked to realize that my businesses and who I was in my career was not actually my purpose, was not my true identity.
Right.
And I think it's so shocking when we become grandiose about our identity and then other people support that grandiosity. And you can see how it's just set up so effortlessly to take you away from going within.
Right.
And it was quite shocking for me when I realized that my career, my lifelong career that I had was just a part of my education. And really releasing and shedding that part of me it's very disorienting. And I can see how for so many people, it's so incredibly difficult to do, because when that changes, every other aspect about you, at least in my case, had also had to change as well. So it really was like this life no longer exists the way that I knew it. And I really have to, for me, that was the dark night of the soul, is really waking up to realizing that this is a new life. And although there's a lot of opportunity in this new life with this deeper sense of understanding, there's going to be a lot of effort to not want to return to the old ways in which I was living, thinking, and believing and performing. So it was, and it's, once you commit to that process, I would constantly get caught up in when it got difficult, trying to go backwards to that time and space of that individual. That's where I would have these other mini dark nights of the souls as well, is when I would be afraid, when I would distrust, when I would have an expectation, when I would just be tired of it all, is when I'd always return in that weakness, and that's in that those moments of suffering, but also realizing that it causes more suffering to not just face what it is that you're suffering about. I started to learn that, and I started to develop a relationship with suffering. And like you said,
Yeah.
instead of trying
Yeah.
to run away from it,
Right.
I rather would just go into it. And it
Right.
necessarily didn't feel any better, but I knew that the other end of that was fruitless.
Yeah, you just described you described the psychic life cycle and the process of learning at the bottom of the cycle, and how that when you are down there, you are at sort of the equal opposite place, 180 degrees away from the place where you were really living through your identity, your prior identity. And we should go into this identity thing and how Jonathan might have been using the term identity, and perhaps it's the same way that Jordan Peterson is using it, but it's related to identity politics.
I see.
And how that from the Jungian point of view, this is, we have to make some distinction here. So your identity is your persona. The Jungian understanding of the persona is the same thing as their synonyms as identity. And so your identity is you go to my website and look at what the little pages are and what the bio says and where I come from and what I'm here doing. And that's basically kind of a snapshot of my identity. And your identity is a cheap reflection of your totality.
Right.
It's a very kind of pixelated version of you. Like
There's no
you are.
process.
There's what?
When I hear what you're saying, what I crave is not necessarily the identity, is the process to the identity.
Well,
And kind of like the other things that are surrounding why I do what I do. I think that seems to be more hidden from the mainstream. And that really is more so what interests me, is what got you to this point, and then how do you live your life around your identity?
well, okay, so in where I'm coming from, and from the Jungian perspective, the identity is basically a Halloween costume.
Right.
It's just a Halloween costume, or it's a professional suit or dress that you put on, that you go to work with, or that you go out with. It's your wardrobe, actually, of pants and dresses and shirts and blouses and ties that you put on for different occasions. And so when you're over here with this group, you dress this way, and when you're over here with this group, you dress that way, and you kind of put that wardrobe together. That's your identity. Now, what if what was so important in life was your wardrobe? And that's really all you focused on is, well, when I'm out with these friends over here, I've been wearing this kind of outfit. And then when I go to work, at least with this boss, I wear this kind of outfit. But I was thinking, maybe what I should do is I should wear a different outfit with my boss, because then that will make him relate to me differently. And you really just focus on, and your wardrobe is kind of the central focus, and whether or not you're going to change your wardrobe. That's like saying, maybe I need another certificate or a degree or something like that. Or maybe I should be seen with this person or that person, because then that will give other people the idea that I'm coming from this tradition or whatever. If you focus your life on how you look, that's your identity from the Jungian perspective. And it's just a suit. It's just a wardrobe. And it's important because it's kind of like you're in the game of life. You have a little Barbie or Ken doll, and then you have a wardrobe for your Barbie or Ken doll, and you kind of need to have the right clothing and stuff to do all the things that Barbie and Ken do. But um, but it's but if that's the level where you stay at, that's you're only as deep as Barbie and Ken. And what you from the Jungian perspective, your identity wants to be a natural, it should be a natural consequence of the capital S self, of the deeper you, of the higher self or the deeper self. It should be something that represents, it does represent who you are at a time. And you notice that as you grow older, your identity changes, and the groups that your peer groups change and all of that, and your costume changes, and the way you think about yourself and your role and your position in society, that changes. Your identity changes because you are growing, you are developing, you are evolving. And so your identity should not even be, it should be a natural, kind of an easy thing. If you haven't, and it's not always a natural and easy thing, right? Because there's a lot of social pressures to mold people into different roles to make an efficient society. And so having a natural identity that represents your deeper self is not an easy thing at all, really. And but it should be. Now, in the way they're talking about identity as you don't choose your identity, I guess in a way saying that makes sense if you're doing things the right way. If you're doing things the right way, then your identity is just what comes out of you. It's what's that?
It like reveals rather than a structure.
It just reveals, and it's natural, and it comes to you. It comes to you naturally, and you change your persona, your identity naturally, and you shouldn't be choosing it, and the more time you spend choosing aspects of your identity, the more you're just fixated on the ego, on the more superficial, or on the the upper layer of the psyche. And but in the identity politics thing, this is kind of a very shadowy kind of social control program where it's okay, if you have a society where the individual is honored as a unique image of God, like what we have in the West and what's in the United States Constitution and all that kind of stuff, and the individual is sovereign, and the whole government and everything is structured so as to facilitate the individual's efficient pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, and all of that. Well, the government, or the power structure, so to speak, should stay out of the way and just be there to efficiently kind of do what the sovereigns, the citizens, want to get accomplished. But what we have with the identity politics is we have an oligarchy where we have a sort of a power structure, and what they would like to do is, instead of dealing with, in the case of America, 330 individuals who all have their own destiny, and who will do whatever they want whenever they want because it's their life to live. Instead of having that, let's slice up society into about 32 squares, and then let's coax everybody into one of these squares. And then once everybody has a political affiliation and a job or a career and language that matches that square, then we'll just have a representative for each of these 32 squares that we will hire, and then we'll keep everybody, and then we'll basically move everybody around. We'll just have to move people around in chunks of 5 million or something, and then we'll kind of be able to control society through these chunks, because we know that people that identity is so important to people. we'll just sort of figure out what people naturally want for an identity, and then we'll kind of just force them to stay into those little blocks, and then we'll have a way of organizing society much more effectively as a top-down, hierarchy. That's a lot better than just just kind of getting out of the way and letting all 330 million people just have their own way about life. They don't want that. So identity politics is kind of a way of designing a little checkerboard and then putting everybody into different squares and then magnetizing everybody to each one of those squares. And so when people like Peterson are objecting to that and saying, you don't choose your identity, it's kind of like saying, you get to use any piece of any of those squares or any square anywhere, and you get to do whatever you want, and you're your own little player piece on the board, and then you'll change your identity when you want to. But at the same time, I mean, I know there's the whole thing with, in order to get people into the squares, they have these, there's kind of a black magic kind of witchcraft kind of alchemy going on with all that identity politics stuff. But and I would have to kind of think about this more closely and go back to those guys and kind of say, how exactly are they talking about identity compared to the Jungian understanding? But it sounds to me like they're basically just rejecting the idea that that there's a preset number of identities that have been structured for them, and they're basically saying, no, we're breaking out of that. And so in that way, I agree with that. But identity... Yeah, okay. But identity in the Jungian understanding is synonymous with the persona, and it's like your wardrobe or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, it's interesting because that identity, doing shadow work for me was, first off, I didn't know shadow work existed until I hit that low point, that psychic end of life cycle. And I know people who literally have said to me, oh, I thought that that's when I die. And to me, going through the dark night of the soul, that's definitely, it 100% felt like not just an inner death, but it felt like I'm going to physically die. Like that's how disoriented I was.
Total dismemberment,
Total dismemberment. And I've heard other people say, oh, I'll do that in my next life, or I'm not going to work on the sovereignty process because I'm pretty sure that means I'm going to physically check out. And so that's kind of an interesting phenomenon. But as far as this identity politics that you were talking about, is starting to do the shadow work was the initiation for me to start to become more sovereign and self-aware and more conscious of what exactly was being played out in this world stage that most people claim that they're against, slavery and being controlled, but meanwhile, they're still being funneled right to that same very place.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the golden shadow?
Yeah. So the golden shadow is aspects of yourself that are extremely bright and genius and special and unique and evolutionary. And this is your genius. This is the highest aspects of you, totally unique to you. And this is like alchemical gold. But the golden shadow is the reason why these really genius, amazing aspects of you might be in the shadow, so to speak, might be repressed, is because they can't, just like the darker shadow material, they can't find their way into the ego, into your consciousness, and they can't find their way into your persona, the way you represent yourself to the world, because the way you've grown up till now there's not been really a good place for them. Maybe you grew up maybe you were the son or daughter of a preacher, or maybe you were given a role of responsibility in the family business or whatever it is. And things have started to unfold for you in sort of a pre-planned structure. And if you were to find out that your higher purpose has something that has really nothing to do with your family's preconceived notions or what they set up for you, then you repress it, because to access it, it's very powerful, and it would have enough energy to get you to just quit all that stuff and go and just drop things and go do your own thing. And that could destroy a lot of stuff. It could also, in terms of your identity, your persona, you could have a pretty well-formed identity about who you are and what you're here to do and what your role is. And maybe you yourself just really couldn't imagine that, maybe you were raised by atheists, but maybe your whole thing was to actually be some kind of an ordained minister or something like that. Maybe it's just so different from the way you see yourself and the way people around you see you, that you shove down these very these brilliant capacities into the shadow, into the recesses of the unconscious, and so that's golden shadow projection. It's your gold. Your inner gold is being repressed, and it is acting in the same way as your dark primal stuff or your wound stuff. Is that it can't be metabolized, it can't be seen, it can't be taken advantage of without destroying the way that you used to see yourself, but without destroying your identity. Right. And so for that to come out and find its way into your life, it would destroy your identity. But also, secondly, you may, if you're repressing your genius, it's so bright that if you were to let that into your ego, into your consciousness, and then put it into your persona subsequent to that, then you may not be able to handle the kind of grandiosity that would ensue. And that you might get really, really full of yourself, and that could be really dangerous. You could get really narcissistic and really grandiose, because if you don't know how to deal with this genius, this is where people get a Christ complex. Suddenly they have a spiritual awakening, and they get access to some of this inner gold. And maybe some of that inner gold is about teaching other people. It's about being a missionary, being a teacher. And then the ultimate kind of archetypal version of that is Christ, let's say. And then that material gets a hold of their ego and just blows them up. In inflation, it's called. And they think they are the second coming of Christ. And that happens all the time. Or in another culture, the second coming of some other sage or some other saint. And so it can be very dangerous, and it can blow you up. Right. And the psyche knows that, the ego knows that, and so it's too great, too powerful, too hot to handle, and so it shoves it down. And narcissism or grandiosity is when you are getting too much of a dose of that genius, of that alchemical gold, and it's too inflating. And so the idea is that in this individuation process, in this inner alchemical development that we're doing, the idea is to slowly process our darker shadow stuff and to get a hold of our genius stuff and start to get in touch with that and bring it into consciousness and start to refigure out, our lives. Okay, wait a minute, I am really good at this. This does really come naturally to me. People do want to be around me when I do this or that, and and I do feel good doing these things, even though they're different from what I was doing. And then just slowly starting to find a way of putting that into your life and representing it in your life, and and then you will get inflated. You will have all kinds of moments of inflation, of grandiosity, and then you have to kind of let that blow up and then kind of come back down again, let that blow up and kind of come back down to that, kind of learn to expect these periods of inflation as you get more and more in touch with your gold,
Right.
and kind of just be able to mediate the process of accessing and personifying your genius.
Yeah, that's great. I had a teacher back in the day who was becoming quite large in her own right in her field. And
Yep.
somebody had asked her, like, what do you do now that you're getting famous? And she said, well, you have to understand, the bigger I get, the more attention I get, the more I need to look at myself. So she was like very, very clear that she was trying to consciously go into that aspect of herself, but trying not to, purposely get it too big and where she has to get deflated in a way that's kind of negative. I want to ask you one
Yeah.
other quick question
Oh
here.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
The difference between individuation and integration. I've seen a lot of TikTok memes lately with some grotesque being crawling out of a railroad saying, you must integrate your shadow. And I'm just
Right.
wondering if you could just explain a little bit kind of in the integration of the shadow and then the
Mm-hmm.
difference between individuation and integration and their
Yeah.
similarities and differences.
Individuation is a full life process, one life of waking up and consciously um, consciously maturing yourself,
Mhm.
being involved in the conscious, purposeful, self-aware act of growing up and healing and growing up and moving through the stages of life, and getting the most out of each stage of life, of getting in touch with your genius and putting your genius into the world, and processing your shadow stuff, rescinding your shadow projections. We didn't talk too much about shadow projection, but this is part of the process, is realizing where you're projecting and pulling that stuff back. The whole lifelong process of the work, so to speak.
Would you say this is like an awakening process? What I want to
It
ask,
is.
there was this like claiming of the terminology woke. And
Yep.
for me, had been going through what I would have classified as a spiritual awakening. And I thought to myself, something doesn't sit right with this terminology of this absolutism of being woke, because I feel like this is, like you said, a lifelong process of individuating and understanding yourself to the degree where you understand that this is never ending. And for me, when I heard that term woke, I immediately red flags went up because
Yeah.
I thought, how did this end before it even begun?
Yeah. What woke to me is sort of the satanic version of awakening,
Awakening. Right.
right?
Right.
And so to awaken is to become more self-aware, to increase the altitude of your, you know, we use the term watcher. This is used in spiritual circles. It's the most self-aware part of yourself that's watching yourself. And it's
Right.
like right now, I'm talking to you, right? I'm looking at you and I'm reading you and your face and things like that, and your voice, but I'm also listening to myself talk, and I'm self-reflecting on my own voice, and I'm analyzing my own voice at the same time that I'm analyzing you, and how am I coming off, and is this, if I'm being too aggressive, is this too gentle, whatever it is. And then there's just the whole sense that I'm here in the room with you and that
I,
this is going on,
I have
right?
to pause
That,
quick
yeah,
because
yeah.
what you just said is actually, I believe, such a profound statement. Because if you're not doing this sort of a process, usually you're doing that after the fact.
Yeah, and
Having conversations and you're interacting and you're making decisions, big decisions, and then after the fact,
right,
reflecting back. So the
right.
ability to demonstrate what you're
Yeah,
saying and what you're
yeah.
showing is the ability to check yourself in the moment and readjust and
Constantly
kind of navigate constantly in the moment.
watching, constantly
Um,
watching. There's always the watcher is there watching yourself, analyzing your reflections. You judge something that's outside, recognizing, oh, how much of what I just thought is a projection, how much of that is real. It's a continual
accountability.
accountability. It's yes, it's the watcher. It's the highest, most self-reflective part of you that you can muster. And it will get more refined as you do the work. It will gain altitude. It
Yeah.
will be able to see deeper into yourself. And it will, at first, it might just be watching the thoughts, but then it will be watching the emotional state. It will be watching the body and impulses that are going on, reactions that are going on in the body.
Like a
It
self-regulation mechanism too. Like I just have
it's
found,
the pilot, it's the captain of the ship, and
yeah,
it's like the captain can be like right there, barely peeking over the hull, or the captain can be way up there on a big, whatever they call that, and be way up there with a telescope and have all kinds of view, or have sonar and be able to go down and stuff. This is your ability. This is where you are, and this is how awake you are. This is how aware you are. It's how much altitude and depth and detail you have of seeing, self-reflecting upon yourself, and for self-reflecting upon the world around you in real time.
yeah, if
And
I can say something to you, a
yeah,
lot of
yeah,
the spiritual community and individuals talk about the process of ascension. And when
yeah,
you're talking about what you're saying is that to me, ascension feels like 50% of the picture, because if you're going up to that tower, you still have to have the ability to look down and participate in the world in a way where you stay connected to
yes,
that tower.
that's
So
right.
you hear a lot of people talking about ascension, and somehow, this, we've talked about this nihilistic sort of personality comes out where, well, now I'm up here and I don't have to participate down there, or I'm looking
Mm,
to escape my responsibilities
yeah,
with other people who are up here. So
that's
just
right.
that kind of ascension, to me, had to be coupled with an equal amount of work to what I would say descend, while maintaining that vision to
Mm-hmm.
be able to operate as consciously as I possibly can in the moment.
Yeah, ascension, as it's spoken about in the New Age community, is, it's definitely. I mean, it's the idea. It's the eternal idea of awakening, right?
Right,
Of
right,
increasing your self awareness,
right.
and it's their version is probably very Easternized,
Yes.
um, and but it is also there's also a lot of projection of utopia, right? And being saved, and saving the world, and all of this is kind of tied up in the idea of ascension. Plus, also, like you said, um, the need to escape the suffering of the here and now, and the body and the emotions and all
Right,
that.
right. I'm going to create a new world, and the earth is going to split. It's going to be heaven on earth over here, and you
Yeah,
guys are going to suffer. And
yeah,
I feel as though I haven't experienced that reality yet, although I do have moments of bliss. I can experience that within myself, but I'm very much a participant of my environment and aware of what's going on simultaneously. I'm not
yeah.
looking anymore to escape that. I'm looking
That's
to
right.
participate
That's
as
right.
consciously as I can.
That's right. You're willing to be with whatever makes you suffer.
Absolutely. Because I
Be,
realize when I don't, I'm stagnant. And then I
that's
find
right.
that pernicious word that I've heard so many millions of times from myself and from others is I'm stuck. And to
Yes.
me, I feel like there's probably no greater pain than feeling stuck.
Yeah. But when you're feeling stuck because you're not, you haven't been able to muster the strength to go into the stuff that's sticking you, the stuff that's holding you back, your
Yeah.
shadow stuff.
Right. There must
then
be a level of awareness, though, there must have been something that presented itself to you that you're conscious of to, I think, identify with the feeling of being stuck. It's not like you're completely blind. It's almost like there was
oh
an opportunity that presented and you don't have the strength or courage or know how to do it, and you're consciously resisting that progression.
yeah, it brings us to the question of why do some people, when they get stuck, why do some people just stagnate and stay there? And why do some people say, no, I'm not going to stagnate? They may stay there for a little while, and they say, no, I realize that the only way through this is I have to go through this thing that's sticking me. I have to really break this up, whatever this is, and I'm going to have to maybe make some serious life decisions that may shatter the way my life was structured before, but that I'm going to have to do this to go forward, or I'm going to be really hurting, or I'm going to die, or whatever. Why are some people able to muster that courage and that will to do that, and many people are not? And I don't know. It's like saying, why do some acorns germinate and others don't? You
Mm-hmm.
know, and so I guess the ability to transform a a dark night of the soul, or transform the shadow into light, so to speak, is directly related to your altitude, to your ability to be able to see the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can only really do the amount of work that you can do is totally related to how much can you see, how
Right.
much are you capable of seeing at that time.
Yeah,
So
or
you
I think depending on which direction you're seeing. So for me, I
yeah
found that a lot of people who do get caught in that feeling of being stuck, it's because their only peripheral or their lens is looking back into the past, or they're looking back into
yes.
areas where they were stuck, and they don't have that ability to trust in what is unseen.
And that's totally true. But also, you'll find that even when the conscious mind, the ego, doesn't really have the ability um, to consciously make the decisions necessary to evolve, then what will often, in the individual who's destined to evolve, what will end up happening is the big S self, the deeper part of you, will put you in a situation or put you in multiple situations until you can't help but see what it is that you need to see and do what it is that you need to do.
Right. And
And
what are
yeah,
some examples of some of those things that really, really kind of back you into a corner and kind of give you no other choice? For me,
well,
I found
yeah.
it that the most
Hmm.
pressing issues weren't physical. I've been through a lot of physical
Yes,
ailments with my illness. It
that's right.
wasn't that. That wasn't the hardest thing.
Right.
It was really facing myself through other people and feeling a lot of the things that would arise through encounters through like very, very close mirrors. Like to me,
Yes.
that felt like that was the most deconstructing of my
Oh
personality.
yeah. Oh yeah. We should talk about that because, well, that's a very feminine, relational
Okay.
kind of way of looking at this work,
Hmm.
in that you use and this isn't just does to say that it's feminine or relational doesn't mean that it's only women that are doing this. To do this work, really what we've been talking about, this individuation, is something that you can do some of it alone with self-reflection, but you can't do all of it in isolation, and that you have to be doing this work in relation. And whether it's an intimate relationship, or whether it's a business partnership, or whether it's friendship, or just relation with people on the street, or however it is, your other people are going to be you're going to need other people to trigger you, right? You're going to design a life for yourself where you're not so easily triggered and things are stable for you. And it's going to be when you get out in the world, or when you bring somebody else into your life, that they're going to start pushing your buttons, and you're going to start getting triggered, and repressed aspects are going to start coming to the surface. And that's when you're going to start having more opportunities to go through more stuff, to clean out more garbage, to analyze deeper levels of yourself. And a lot of this stuff that needs to be analyzed is relational stuff, and it has to do with relational projection, animus projection, or like we've been watching the Sam Vaknin, right? Isn't that his name, Sam Vaknin?
Sam Vaknin. So let me ask you a quick
Yeah,
question now that you're
yeah,
bringing up Sam
yeah,
Vaknin, who
yeah,
is he's a psychologist, I
yeah,
believe, right?
yeah, yeah,
But so for me, I have experienced relationship that could appear at times to be unhealthy or toxic, or
yeah,
even the dreaded narcissist,
yeah.
codependent, borderline
Mhm,
relationship.
mhm.
But actually, they weren't. It was like an opportunity. If the right pairing was there, it almost felt like there was an opportunity to actually work through aspects of that. So that to
Yeah,
me feels like there is a fine line between you. Please help me. The
yeah,
fine line between a narcissist and a borderline or codependent, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
actually the ability to stay in it and navigate those patterns and behaviors
Oh yeah,
to
yeah. These are
actually
yeah,
heal.
yeah. These are
I
kind of
don't see that
yeah.
talked about in psychology ever, but I
Oh,
feel as though it could be a golden opportunity.
well, it's definitely in Jungian psychology. I don't know if I've heard Sam say things like, "You find out you're a narcissist, you find out you're a borderline. Oh well, you're stuck with it now." I don't know if that's his full position. I've heard him say that, but no, no. So this is kind of two different kind of pieces here. Is that you have the reality. Okay, borderline. It sounds to me from looking at this, and I haven't looked at it, at his version of this um, personality disorder, for that long. But it sounds to me like that basically, and I think I've heard him say this, that narcissism and borderline are kind of the two ends of a single spectrum,
Right,
kind of two sides of the same coin, right?
right, right.
And 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 then so having borderline personality traits, or having narcissistic personality traits, or having both that kind of have their way of injecting themselves,
Right.
is a diagnosis. Okay, great. And then there's being self-aware and using relationship as an evolutionary vehicle.
Yeah.
That's you, whether you have borderline traits or not. Doing this work that we're talking about today, this individuation, this inner alchemy, this psychospiritual development work, this is going to go on no matter if you're diagnosed as borderline narcissistic, or whether you have other personality disorders or other pathologies and neurotic behavior and addictions and neediness of other kinds. And it's no matter what it is, you're going to be working through all that stuff.
Anyway, right.
You're going to be doing that. And then when it comes to relationship, once you get to a certain level of awareness, and once you've committed yourself, once you've kind of gotten through one of those dark nights of the soul, and you kind of punch through with enough willpower and courage, and kind of broke out on the other side, you have now attained some wings, another level. And once you get to that level and you have higher awareness now, you're not going to be able to get into a relationship with somebody who's at the lower level that you were at
Right.
2-3 years ago, or whatever it was. And so now now your relationships have to be more conscious. They have to be higher quality vehicles. All relationships are vehicles for evolution. They all are happening naturally. But as you do this work, and as you keep refining yourself, you will find that, just in the same way that kids grow up, a 7-year-old kids don't play with 3-year-olds, and
Mm-hmm.
14-year-olds don't play with 7-year-olds, and on and on. And so once you get to a certain, you just keep getting into places where what you need out of a relationship in terms of its productive capacity is greater than what you needed 5 years ago, and what that other person could offer. You need a more aware person for where you are now, and then you're going to need and then either that person, you're either going to get more aware with that person, or you're going to reach a ceiling with that, and then that person's going to drop off, and then you're going to be in a solo mode for a while, and that's where you do the work solo, and that has its own pros and cons. And then you're going to get into another relationship, and then you're going to do the work with that person to as great a degree as you can, and you just kind of keep going through this process. But the borderline thing is borderline narcissism thing is it's very useful to be able to sort of use that as a framework and go, oh, okay, I can see how I'm narcissistic, how I'm grandiose, right? Yeah. Grandiosity is the way they would speak about it in the Jungian situation. Grandiosity. I can see how I'm grandiose. I can see Sam talks about the inner introject. Yeah. And I can see how I'm feeding narcissistic supply. It's called, I'm feeding my own inner introject, my ego and persona, and I'm keeping it alive by putting myself in situations and arranging myself in such a way so as to reflect other people's gaze. Right? And so I'm positioning myself, and I'm calling on my natural talents to position myself and orient myself so that you see this nice, shiny little side of me. And then you will go, oh, look at that brightness. And then everybody will start looking at me, and then I'll take that and I'll use that for inflationary purposes. Right. That's the narcissism. And so it's good to look at that and go, okay, how am I doing that? Mm-hmm. And then start allowing yourself to deflate, and allowing yourself to come back down to earth, and allowing yourself to question, am I orienting myself in life so that I can get this narcissistic supply, so I can get this gaze also off of other people? Or am I orienting myself so as to manifest my highest purpose in this lifetime, the capital S self-work? And let me start kind of putting the shiny stuff kind of to the side a little more, and start coming down off the addiction of the narcissistic supply, and start reconnecting with my deeper spiritual nature, and then start working on that, and start getting into, it's kind of like being an artist, and you're either out there in the world and you're on the cover of whatever magazine, and you're, oh, so-and-so's new kind of art, or their new music, such and such band's new sound. Oh, and you're all over Rolling Stone magazine. Or are you just a musician back at home with the bandmates at the rehearsal studio, working on songs, practicing, wood shedding, we call it, just doing the work of increasing your skill, writing better songs, and being an artist. So it has to do with getting away from Rolling Stone magazine and what everybody else is saying about you and your work, and getting back to just getting into the work itself and being an artisan. So that's the narcissist side, and how you have to pull off of that. On the borderline side, then it's about
People also call this empath. Like I'm a super empath.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's the same idea of object projection, external, right? So projecting, it's object relations theory, and so it's projecting onto another person. It's really not any different from these Jungian complexes, where you have the mother complex, the father complex, or you have the projection of the anima and the animus. That's sort of another framework that totally relates to this. And the borderline needs the other person, they need that. It's like two egos, two, not egos, but just two auras, two psychic selves that need to kind of merge. And that the borderline needs that other person to be merged into them for them to feel whole. And if they break off from that, then they collapse. Their supply collapses, and they could go down to suicide or whatever. So it's the same thing with the borderline. Now has to realize how they're projecting onto the other person, how they're projecting savior or whatever it is onto the other person, and how needy and codependent they are on that other person, and then start to rescind their projections. And then they're going to have to deal with the rage that comes in and the anger that comes in as they start to pull away from that, and not abandon the other person, not turn them into the enemy, and then so that you can then go look for another person to give you your support. Yeah, right. And then to kind of slowly but surely become autonomous, and then be able to be next to them and have energy next to them without being parasitic to them.
What a gorgeous, difficult opportunity. I mean, to me, I feel like I love this sort of work because it gives us an opportunity to not be diagnosed forever. It gives us an opportunity to move away from labels, to shift, to evolve. And that's something that the current medical model really doesn't invite at all.
They don't have any idea.
The power, the energy of that connection, when you can work through those difficult patterns that have been in the past labels for life, and understand the potential within that. I mean, to me, it's such a beautiful opportunity, but one that we're not, the mainstream is even allowing as a permission.
Yeah, and I don't think we can't, the mainstream in our lifetime is so, Jung pointed out that the highest potential state of awareness of an individual is far higher than the average group state of awareness. So whenever you are in a group, it could be your workplace, it could be your extended family, it could be your church, it could be
Why is that, Colin?
Why is it that, well, it kind of makes sense that everything kind of has to
even out?
It has to even out, because if you have if you have a group, any kind of a group, let's say it's a corporation, and it's whatever corporation, and everybody is on the same page. We got to all get on the same page, and everybody's on the same page, and then a couple people get off that page and they start turning the page. Well, then that threatens everybody else, and maybe not everybody else has the capacity to see the higher potential of this business and where it should go, or to they don't have that capacity yet, and so they're seeking safety. Their position is dependent on everybody else kind of being comfy around them, and if things get too kind of edgy, well, then the board of directors might decide that really the whole trajectory of the company has changed, and then maybe really half these people need to be fired. And so, it's kind of, and any group is like this. And so every group kind of finds its
happy medium, so to speak.
That happy medium. Yeah. And then, so, but the individual has the, off from the group, has the ability to go wherever they want to go, and they can go, and they have a much higher potential. So we can't look to the group. We can't, and we have a whole society. It's really like this. So you have, so in order for you actually have to have the rise and fall of many civilizations. Like we can look at the Western civilization, or of many societies, rising and falling and rising and falling and rising and falling in order to individuate, and in order to come to these different stages of I mean, if you look at Ken Wilber's system, the integral theory system, you can see all these different stages of psychosocial development, and each of those can be thousands of years long, and so, or at least many hundreds of years long, and so we can't wait around for the society to evolve, and so we can't really we we can't help but have a lot of our mental makeup come from the culture. It's kind of the construction set. It's the operating system. It's like Apple OS or Mac OS or MS DOS for Microsoft. It comes with you, and it's built into the language, it's built into the environment, it's built into the architecture, it's built into the behavior of your parents and everyone around you. It comes with you, and so you're going to be limited to. You're going to have certain limitations. In the same way that one kind of computer program, like, for example, on Mac OS, I can go into the search bar and I can put something into the search bar and it can almost instantly find anything on the hard drive. Whereas you go into Microsoft, but because of the way the whole data structure works, it could take 2 days to search a large hard drive for what you're looking for because of the way the whole operating system is built. So there, you're going to there's limitations to what you can only you're this is why we talk about karma and multiple lifetimes and reincarnation and all that kind of stuff, is because there's only so much that you can do in one lifetime.
Yeah,
And
let
so
me ask you a
yeah.
question quick. What, as so far as individuation and this process, could you just clarify? Because there's a lot of people that refer.
Individuation and integration, right? That's where we were.
Yeah, and I wanted to also bring in one other thing, is a lot of people talk about exiting the matrix, and I'd love
Yeah.
your feedback on actually what that is and what
Yeah.
that requires.
Okay, really quick on individuation and integration. Individuation, like we said, is the whole lifelong process of growing up and waking up,
Right.
as Ken Wilber says.
Love it.
But integration is the process of integrating some specific aspect that's been repressed that needs to be brought into consciousness, and worked with some kind of shadow material, golden shadow or dark shadow material, or in the Jungian system, aspects of your gender stuff, gender identity, animus type stuff, or just any kind of any kind of stuff that has to do with archetypal energies that need to find a place in your life, and
Just to
so
clarify,
it's more of
yeah,
a process.
when you see a meme that says integrate your shadow, I'm just clarifying this.
Does that work? Does that make sense?
It means like integrating many aspects of
Yeah.
whatever shadow is arising. It's not just like a once and done thing, is what I was
No.
wanted to just stress and clarify, is that
Yeah, we should
integrate your shadow isn't as easy as that sounds. It's a process of integrating many different things that arise.
Yeah, it's like raising children and all of the many different struggles that are going to come from raising children as they move through as they grow up and they're in different stages of life. And you're going to be like, God, new challenge. Oh God, now this, now this, now this.
Right.
It's a continual kind of challenge. I'm not a parent, but I can clearly see that, that challenge, and it's a continual on your toes, kind of ready for the next thing, and then you're going to have to work through it. What problems is she having at school, or with the kids down the block, or what are her needs now, and all this kind of stuff, and blah blah blah, and test scores and whatever all the kids are. It's a continual new process, and it goes on forever, and this is part of your life. And so integrating repressed or disowned parts is the work. That's the work itself. It's specific work on specific things, and it's like, okay, I'm working on this now. All right. And then I'll work on that until that kind of seems to it seems to kind of worked itself out, and it's not poking out any much anymore. And then when it starts to poke out again, I'll work on it some more. And so it's a constant, it's alchemy. You're doing the work in the laboratory. Individuation is that, but over the course of a whole lifetime.
Right.
Now, that's clarity on that. But as far as the matrix and leaving the matrix, escaping the matrix, and all that kind of stuff, well, I would have to define the matrix first. And there's different, I mean, obviously we're coming from we start with the understanding probably from the movie The Matrix, right? And you can, and the matrix, well, what do they say? It's the world that's been pulled over your eyes to blind you, or something like that. It's fake world, right? It's the matrix could simply be said that the matrix is really civilization itself. You could say in a very generic way.
Right.
The matrix is culture and civilization itself, and that it is you could go even deeper and say the matrix is nature, or it is the construction of reality, right? And that your psyche, your mind-body system, is creating through projection and through sensory reactions. It is creating, the grass isn't really green. That's the way our whole optical system is designed. And so you could go really deep with it, and this is kind of the Eastern or Indian understanding of Maya and the reality as a simulation, kind of, right? And this is where you could look at Donald Hoffman's work, which is like subjective idealism, kind of interpreted for today. And
the idea of perception, like you've never really experienced something outside of, it's just your perception of it.
That's right. And so, yeah, in his understanding, the world that you see is kind of an overlay of multiple interfaces, and that we have evolved to perceive the world through interfaces, through projections, really, which are kind of like movies, little, they're like, they're
Stories, little movies, yeah.
Movies, narratives, we're perceiving a facsimile of the world that is designed in such a way so that we can efficiently interface with the objective world that's out there. But we don't really know what the objective world is. We're designed to operate in it, but not to see it clearly. That's not how we're designed. We're not designed to objectively see the world. We're designed to interface with the world productively. And so our whole system and our way our body is made and everything is to do that. And so at the most basic way, the matrix is just this simulated reality itself. And you take some LSD or some ayahuasca or whatever, and you break down the psychic modeling that you're using to perceive this world, and all of a sudden another world is there. So in a way, our shared reality that we all share, because you and I, we have, and everybody else around us, we have shared chemistry, neurochemistry, and all that. That's a matrix, and that's sort of the fundamental matrix. Then there's the matrix that's closer to the movie, which is the matrix of human civilization and human culture that has been collectively built over a long period of time with these ideas that of this is how the world works. And we're told this is how we read from history, this book, and this is what happened in the past. Or we read from the Bible that this is what is happening, and this is what did happen, and this is what should happen.
Right.
And we heard from the news that this, that, and the other, and we kind of collectively pull the wool over our eyes, or like in the Wizard of Oz, it's a Wizard of Oz type situation. And then to wake up from the matrix, just kind of to pull the curtain back and see that there's, in that sense, it's very conspiratorial. And in the movie, there was a sort of a machine race that was actually controlling humanity, and so we could sort of interpret that as the machine race that's controlling humanity is sort of the dark functions, the shadow functions, the parasitic side of humanity, where there is a function where some people and some systems do form which are parasitic to the rest of us, or that seek to enslave and use us for our energy. Then that's where the battery, Morpheus holds up a battery and says, you're being used as a battery. And so if you look at the way we structure civilization and the way money works and the way the way our labor is converted, and how taxation works, and how the mind control of the media kind of keeps you in this role and all of that, that's a matrix. It's a simulated cultural reality, cultural and societal reality, that is your pre-programmed kind of life world. And it'll be a little different in India, it'll be a little bit in China, but everybody will be living on some kind of a cultural plantation. And is that something that can be avoided? Is that something that was designed by a reptilian race that's, doing that? Or is it sort of part of the whole evolution of mankind, and we do it to ourselves? And because we have the oppressors and then we have the victims, and we're all kind of playing into the role, we're all kind of, hey, I know that the economic system is parasitic and it's sucking off a lot of our energy, but I'm really concerned about my pension and what's in my 401k. Well, so you're just enslaving yourself with that.
Right.
And so, or the politicians and their handlers are manipulating me, but I need to go down to vote for one of two parties tomorrow. And so it's kind of like, is it really something that's coming from outside, that's exogenous, or is this something that's endogenous? Is it something that's part of the human psyche? And if I look at nature, and I look at the way other animals treat each other, and I look at how spiders work and all kinds of other little creatures and parasites, I see that it's just full of parasites. It's full of organisms tricking and using each other and all of that. And so kind of think that the matrix itself is sort of organic, and that the style of matrix that we're in is kind of representative of where our consciousness is at these days. Mm-hmm. And so then waking up from the matrix is waking up to, it could be just waking up to the fact that all of civilization and society is kind of a pre-planned thing, and that you don't have to go into these roles that were designed for you. And you can definitely discard what the mainstream is saying and do your own thing. That's kind of a one way of looking at coming out of the matrix, just doing your own thing. But then another way of looking at it is that it's to awaken to the parasitic controllers, the parasitic agents, the agent Smiths, who are working for the machine, and combat them and fight for your freedom and fight for your own mind, and in the process wake up. And it's interesting how in the Matrix, on one hand, Neo is fighting the machine, he's fighting Agent Smith, and he's doing this kind of battling for his own autonomy. But at the same time, he's doing more of a spiritual process where Morpheus is guiding him, and the Oracle are guiding him to awaken to higher and higher levels, and to recognize the deeper metaphor of the matrix that we described before, which was the matrix is projected reality itself. So Neo is waking up to the controllers, to the parasitic side of civilization and fighting it, but he's also waking up to the fact that, wait a minute, this is all a simulation, and depending on how my inner modeling works, that changes how my outer world is. And by changing myself, I end up shape-shifting reality out there. And that was the deeper level of the waking up or revelation that Neo is going through. And they're both represented in that movie, which I think is one of the, it's just an incredibly important, the way that movie came together, and the whole thing about that movie is incredibly synchronistic. It came out at the perfect time, and it's got a lot of very high level wisdom for the person who's on a psycho-spiritual development path.
Absolutely.
So that's the matrix as I see it. It's kind of like two levels of it. It's projected reality itself, and how reality is itself a simulation, and how the inner reflects the outer and vice versa, and changing the inner will change the outer and all that. And then the second level of the sort of parasitic side, or the parasitic function of civilization that wants to use us for our own energy, and how that we can break off from that and become true individuals and reserve our own energy for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Wow, you gave so many great, accessible, and interesting and deep explanations to so many things I hear so many people talking about.
Sure.
And I really appreciate that, because one thing that's important to me is that somehow we continue to wake up how we hijack ideology without understanding process. And, this is, I think, a way that we can get ourselves caught and not really move forward. So I just want to thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, Stephanie.
Really in depth going over these terms. So
Yeah.
I hope to
Anytime.
speak to you again soon. So thank you so much,
Okay.
Colin.
Thank you. Talk to you later.